Hi class, I'm just going to go over the upcoming community needs analysis paper that you have due this week. This will just be a quick video, but I just want to make sure to cover a couple of important topics for anybody who's still concerned about how to get started on this paper. So the community needs analysis, which is due next Sunday, is a paper that you will write jointly with your dyad partner. Be submitting one paper that you each contribute to. The body of the paper should be about 5 to 7 pages, plus additional pages for tables and charts, statistical information, whatever the case may be for your particular paper, a cover page, and a citations page in APA format. I know that there have been many questions about the length of assignments. The guideline is 5 to 7 pages. The idea is that it's brief, but also thorough. So if you need to have 8 pages, that's okay. Try to make it more concise than going way over the limit, just out of respect for the purpose of the paper. But the guideline is about 5 to 7 pages, and I think you should have no trouble filling that out. Please also make sure to include applicable headings for each section. So you'll see in the syllabus that, and I'm going to go over it right now, that the assignment is broken up into 4 different sections. So please make sure to provide headings to differentiate those sections from one another. I know that I have talked about this many times and in the beginning of the course as well, but please make sure that especially as you're submitting your papers together, make sure that your writing matches, make sure that someone is going over the joint paper to make sure it's consistently written, and also make sure that the paper is thoroughly proofread. You can do this by reading it out loud to make sure it makes sense to you, and just know that I will deduct points for multiple typos, usage and grammar issues, spelling problems, punctuation problems, run-on sentences. All of those things distract from the meaning and intent behind your paper, and we want to make sure that those kinds of things that are easily fixable before submitting a paper do not distract from your work. So the community needs analysis, as I mentioned, is in 4 different parts. You can think of it as kind of a funnel where you start large and gradually work your way down into something more narrow. This is partially why you needed to have submitted first the community that you're focusing on, and then secondly the community need, in order to start thinking about those things as related, but not necessarily the same exact thing. So the first section is going to be community definition and demographics. Here's where you're going to think big picture about what your community looks like. And some of you have selected geographic areas as your community of focus, and some of you have selected specific populations. And as we know from the readings and from practice, you can define community in a lot of different ways. And we've identified those 5 different types of communities in previous readings. So this might look different for different groups. But whatever it is that you've defined as your community, you're going to outline the parameters of the community. So if that's geographic boundaries, you're going to look at population, you're going to look at boundaries, you're going to look at kind of, where city limits lie, where, city proper, census data, that kind of thing. If it's a more population-based community, you're going to look at the other statistics that are relevant to that. You may not have geographic boundaries, but you should have census data. You should have statistical information about who makes up that community and what it looks like. You're also going to look at the specific structure of that community. So how are politics defined? What kinds of businesses are involved in that community? What kinds of human services address that community? What kind of economic resources does it have? That may be, if you're talking about a national community, that may be political organizations that address the need of that community or who represent that community, or trade unions that work for that community, national advocacy organizations that help define that community's political structure. Or if it doesn't have a formal structure, just kind of give us an idea of what components go into defining that community and making it a community versus just a random group of people. You're also going to describe any quality of life information, and that goes into the second section for community needs data. So when you start looking at the statistics of the community, you're going to start gathering the quality of life information, so crime, socioeconomic status, culture, religion, education level, marriage, civil union, whatever the case may be, you're going to be looking at what life is like for the community. Here is where you're going to include information from at least 2 key informants that you will be interviewing for this project. The key informant interviews should be cited, and if there's a problem or a concern about confidentiality or anonymity, you can give their initials, but they should be cited in your reference page and also throughout your paper. Please also, when citing your informants, give us a brief context as to why this person's feedback is important about the community needs that they're discussing, why it's relevant to whatever it is that you're talking about. You're going to discuss any statistics that are also relevant to the quality of life in your community. The third section is about community strengths and assets. So here you've defined the statistical elements of your community, you've talked about quality of life, you've started to narrow down some of the specific needs that are present in your community. And this third section, you'll start to pull out the strengths and assets that are present there. You want, hopefully you will be able to identify a plethora of strengths and assets in any of the communities that you've identified. But you also want to focus on the ones that you may want to draw on later as you define interventions that you will create for this community. So you want to kind of think critically about where you're going with your assignments in order to really highlight strengths that you personally or you and your group want to build upon later, because that could be very useful to you. Think about these things critically, so think kind of big picture about what strengths and assets that may be present in some of your communities have different challenges, and so what kinds of strengths can help that community overcome some of those challenges. And then finally, you're going to get more nitty-gritty into the problem that you are presenting for this community. So here you're going to identify the target problem or issue that you plan to address, provide the problem size and scope, some of the causes, and also issues to focus on moving forward. This is where you're setting up the next assignment for defining what the need of this community is, and starting to lay the groundwork for later in the next assignment, crafting community level interventions to address that. Here I'd really like you to include information about any relevant social policies. So that could be legislation, it could be funding priorities, it could be political debates, but kind of really try to think big picture about what social policies are affecting this community and impacting that need. Also think about whether any existing services meet the need or do not. Identify if there are already programs in place on a larger scale, on a community level, to address the need that you've identified and whether they're working or whether they're not working. Does anything exist? Does it need to exist? Is it a gap in service? Is it something that you would recommend creating? And remember that is laying the groundwork for the next assignment, where you will be proposing some of those solutions and some of those creative interventions. As always, if anyone has any questions or concerns, please feel free to email me. Otherwise, rely on one another's wisdom and have fun diving into some of these community problems in this paper. I really look forward to reading them.